This hearing of subcommittee will come to order. Today, the subcommittee will kick off a series of hearings in the Commerce Committee on rebuilding America's infrastructure. We start here in the Communications Subcommittee with a focus on how to advance broadband deployment in infrastructure legislation this Congress. I'm glad to convene this hearing with my colleague, Ranking Member Schatz. Broadband connectivity is the digital engine driving investment, innovation, and productivity in virtually every economic sector in the United States. Over the past decade, there have been unprecedented advancements in healthcare, agriculture, transportation, and many other industries because of increasingly ubiquitous broadband connections. These connections are helping industries reduce costs, increase efficiencies, and rapidly identify and act on opportunities for growth. Continuing the success of these developments and maintaining the nation's global leadership in technological innovation are goals that depend on widespread access to a reliable, high-speed broadband connection. Although we have made significant progress on wireline, wireless, and satellite broadband deployments, more needs to be done. There's still a disparity in broadband deployment across the country, particularly in rural America. In its 2018 Broadband Deployment Report, the FCC concluded that far too many Americans remain unable to access high-speed broadband internet access, and we have much work to do. A direct quote from the Federal Communications Commission. To that end, I'm greatly encouraged by the President's support for programs directed toward increasing broadband infrastructure deployment in rural areas. Today, I hope to discuss with our witnesses how Congress can most effectively and efficiently deploy broadband infrastructure to unserved communities. Using lessons learned earlier from broadband projects, President Trump's infrastructure proposal is an opportunity to get broadband to communities that truly need it. This process should start with collecting standardized and accurate data about where the reliable fixed and mobile broadband already exists and where it does not, both in Mississippi and around the country. This is critical to delivering broadband to rural communities that lack service, whether that be through infrastructure legislation or existing federal programs like Phase 2 of the Mobility Fund. Inaccurate information of where broadband exists would only exacerbate the digital divide and leave millions of rural Americans further behind. We don't have accurate data yet, and I hope we can discuss that today in the hearing. As we seek to close the broadband gap in rural America, we should also plan for the next generation of broadband, such as 5G. The availability of 5G communication networks promises to transform the way we experience the internet because of the projected capacity, speed, and reliability. To make next-generation broadband a reality and position the United States so it can win the global race to 5G, we should modernize outdated rules that delay and add unnecessary costs to broadband infrastructure deployment. A bipartisan piece of legislation that I introduced called the Streamlining, Permitting to Enable Efficient Deployment of Broadband Infrastructure, or SPEED Act, does just that. Inaction on our part would take the next generation of jobs, innovation, and investment out of the United States and put us at an economic disadvantage with respect to our global competitors. Clearly, as the FCC concluded in its report that I have just quoted, there is much work to be done. We are almost 1/5 of the way through the 21st century. We ought to be able to accelerate the deployment of next-generation broadband, get all Americans connected now, and close the digital divide once and for all. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Romano, and thank you all, gentlemen. You all submitted excellent written testimonies, which will be included in the record, and your 5-minute summaries were just outstanding. So my hat is off to each of you. Let's begin, Mr. Gillen, with something you brought up, and perhaps others would like to comment on this. This race to win 5G. You say we're in a race with China and Japan, for example, as well as the European Union. What are the consequences of letting someone else win this race? What if China wins the race and we come in second? What does this really mean to Americans?
It's a great question, Chairman. I think the easiest way to think about it is looking backwards. We led the world in 4G wireless, and that led to things like the app economy developing here. You have global giants like Samsung and Ericsson have R&D facilities here in the United States because we have the best networks to innovate off of. So when we talk about 5G and the exciting things happening in healthcare, in transportation and education, we want that innovation to happen here first. And if we aren't first, we risk that innovation going overseas.
Would someone else like to talk about that? All right, okay. If not, we'll move on and I'll get all my questions in. No, so do all of you agree with Mr. Gillen? Yeah, well, Mr. Berry.
Yes, Senator, I agree that we do want to be in first because we get the first mover benefit in the economy. I'm also concerned about, as we move to 5G, that we're also ready for 5G in all of rural America. We need to get the 4G LTE, long-term evolution technology, as well as VoLTE, voice over LTE. And the faster we get there, the faster that we can have the benefits in rural America and urban suburban America of the 5G world, because I don't think we want to leave half the United States or half the nation, behind this economic opportunity for the new mobile world. And so that's my concern. Yes, we need to be on the forefront of innovation, but we also need to do it in a way that allows the entire economy to benefit from this great opportunity.
Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Berry, let me ask you then to elaborate on the concern that I expressed and that you expressed about data collection and broadband mapping. I think you said it's just totally inadequate. So if you'd comment on that first, and then if anyone else would like to follow up, please do. Why is the data so wrong?
The simple answer is garbage in, garbage out. And we're not asking, it's clear. I mean, I'd had great hopes that this next round of data requests would actually produce a better quality service maps. What we actually got, though, was very clear that the FCC requested the wrong perimeters in order to define a granular map that has actual meaning on the ground. And
when did that request go out?
Well, it was a whole series of discussions and back and forth with the FCC. Our carriers, the CCA and our members, said, listen, you should measure signal strength, and you should measure those types of things that consumers expect for usage on the ground. And we didn't do that in this map. What you have is the map that the FCC produced that says, here's the areas that we think are eligible for USF. And all those other areas, including like 99% of Mississippi, is ineligible. And until someone challenges that, it's like having to prove a negative. And I'm very concerned that the map is so disfigured in terms of its reality on the ground that it's almost impossible to have a successful challenge, because you're going to have to challenge literally 98% of the United States in order to do so. We can do better. I would suggest that maybe we need all the resources of the federal government to focus on broadband data and information. NTIA just a few days ago, David Rettel, the new Assistant Secretary of NTIA, suggested that NTIA has a great database and has access to local, state, and governments, and that they could help build a better database that is rational and more accurate about where is broadband and where it is not.
Mr.
Not
Drew,
just wireline, but wireless.
You seem eager to jump in.
Yes. I think, and I'm not an expert on the wireless side of this, but on the wireline side, I think some good starts have been made. We're not there, but take for example, in the ACAM program, the FCC was extremely careful to make sure that there was no overbuilding, that money wasn't given to households that already had other options available, and we are in 25 different states, and we looked very closely at where the locations would be funded. We actually engaged in their challenge process in various areas, and we actually lost some of those challenges that we thought we should have won, but what that meant was there was no possibility that any money would be going for duplicative networks. And in that particular context, I think the FCC had done a really good job using 477 data in terms of precisely targeting the money that was available for broadband. So I think there's a start. I don't think it's all, you know, total chaos out there. I think there are various agencies that are collecting money. In addition, USAC, for each location that we build, each household that we build to, we have to provide the geocode location to them, so they are building a map as time goes on. So I think with coordination among various federal agencies, I think we're getting there, but we're clearly not there yet.
There are better maps, you say.
Well, there's information that hasn't really made its way into the maps. When I looked at the FCC map, there were definitely flaws with it, and I think it's the way, partly the way the 477 data was interpreted. For example, TDS Telecom, our parent company is Telephone and Data Systems. It's also the parent company of U.S. Cellular, and there was confusion in the maps in terms of what was represented as an area that Telephone and Data Systems served. It could have been either our wireless or our wireline area. So there's refinement that needs to be done, but I think the underlying data is there. So it's a matter of evolving these maps and working on them and seeing what needs to be done and moving forward.
Senator Schatz.